Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the El Paraiso Double Anaerobic Wash Processed Colombia from Leaves Coffee Roasters. And there's the box right there. And Leaves, based out of Tokyo, Japan. This is their first time being featured on this channel, and it's a pretty special occasion as this is the first ever Asian coffee roaster we're doing a full box, full bag review of on this channel. Now, our own history with Asian coffee is a little extensive, as we did spend 3 weeks in Japan a couple years ago, as well as 3 weeks in Korea, on what was essentially a 3-week-long coffee and ramen crawl throughout that time. And truth be told, don't recall if I went to Leaves specifically. The photos look somewhat familiar of the coffee shop, but went to so many coffee shops during my time there, I can't exactly recall whether or not I had been to this specific coffee shop. Now, they've been around since 2016, and we saw them featured on Dayglow's Instagram page for the first time ever, and it was this coffee specifically which definitely caught our eye, as the El Paraiso coffees have been some of the most uniquely interesting, diverse, wild, out there coffees that we have ever had. So given that we do want to review a lot more Asian coffee roasters on this channel, it was a perfect opportunity for us to try something a little different. And with that being said, there's a very important note relative to this specific coffee, as if you take a look at the top right there, on the bottom left, I believe that would be, bottom right, there is no roast date on this coffee. So we don't exactly have a specific roast date, and with that being said, we could tell when we were brewing the coffee that the coffee was probably slightly a little older, as it had that kind of really quick drawdown that you experience with slightly older coffees. So that's definitely worth noting before we start the review. This right here is day 11, relative from when we started this coffee, unknown what the actual roast date of this coffee is. Recipe we settled on for this coffee is a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio at 205 degrees Fahrenheit brewed through the Chemex, and as we're going through the notes, you'll kind of see why we settled on that recipe specifically. Now, the roast profile is going to be kind of interesting because it would be very easy for us to just call this a lighter Asian for the roast profile, but given that a lot of people don't have a lot of experience with Asian coffees, this is lighter relative to most of what we had in Japan during our time in Japan. But it's kind of the best comparison is it's lighter than a lot of the light medium Americans like Onyx and Sweet Bloom specifically that we highlight a lot on this channel. And it's lighter than recently La Cabra's come out with, which has been a slightly more developed European, but it's going to be just a shade more developed than something like Say, or even slightly more developed than something like Manhattan. So that's the scale to note for this coffee specifically. But with that out of the way, let's start discussing this coffee itself. And Mystery Day 1, as we'll call it, since we don't have a roast date. It was a pretty wild first impression. That's kind of to be expected given that it's a double anaerobic washed El Paraiso coffee. It had a wide variety of flavors to it. One thing that was really distinguishable and pronounced was a kind of minty taste that was present throughout the entire time we were drinking this coffee. Weirdly clean and sweet at the same time, quite enjoyable, just left us with a pretty wild first impression. Mystery Day 2. And we couldn't quite distinguish what the flavor was in this cup, as it's a very kind of like fresh cut fruit, and that's the best way you can describe it. They have it listed on here as Japanese green plum, I believe, and I've never had a Japanese green plum. I doubt too many Americans have had one. So it's not a flavor profile that's exactly well known around these parts. But with that being said, yeah, it's a pretty kind of fresh cut fruit, sweet, that what you would be getting. Entire cup feels green, quite herbal. As it cools, it finishes off into a pretty heavy citrus. They have lime listed on here. Yeah, definitely very limey coffee. Just would call it complex on this second day. Day 3, we brewed it with Manhattan's recipe, so we upped the temperatures, 208 degrees Fahrenheit, 16 to 1 water to coffee ratio. And at this time, again, the fresh fruit was pretty pronounced, but this coffee was even more intense, like increasing the extraction did bring out the herbal component even more. So you were getting even more of this really, really strong mint, really, really strong green herbs coming from the cup as well. And yeah. Day 4 went back. Coffee is still strongly herbal. Most dominant flavor in the cup at this time was this really strong herbal component, and you could definitely feel a distinct kind of green component in this cup, whatever that may be. The coffee does leave an interesting balance of herb and mint finish in the cup as well. Pretty unique to say the least. We were messing around with the temperature quite a bit, as well as the ratios, and day 5 was probably the last day we had the increased temperatures, as we've just felt the coffee was a little too strong. The herbal component was coming out far too strong with the higher temperatures, and yeah, could essentially call this coffee minty Sprite on this day. That's the best way we could describe it, but it was a super concentrated kind of minty Sprite. Very unique finish. So when we went back on day 6, we settled at 205 and said, okay, this is the way we're enjoying this coffee the most. And Herbal component was down just a slight bit, still quite a bit of depth and complexity to it. Stone fruit is fresh cut fruit, a sweetness in the cup. Really enjoyable actually, contrary to the fact that there's this really strong herbal component. And then day 10, the last day we took some notes. We just let the coffee sit for a little bit and see if we might get some changes from it. Still pretty consistent. Starts off herbal, minty, takes you through a bit of fruit sweetness before settling into a pretty distinctly citrus finish. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. I feel like this tasting wheel is probably relatively unique to a lot of the other coffees that we have featured on this channel, but let's see what's really worth noting. The savoriness at level 4. I think this is the first ever coffee we've had a savoriness at a level 4. That's of course going to be from the really strong herbal component that is in this cup, and I think when the temperatures were higher, you might even be able to push that to a level 5. But at the same time, it was still a pretty clean cup of coffee. It was a very clean cup of coffee, and it was a very lasting cup of coffee, so that's why you have those two at level 4 as well. Citrus fruit level 4, and it was probably more like a 4.5. The mint finish, the lime finish after the coffee has cooled down is very, very strong as well. So that one you could probably put at a level 5. Stone fruit level 3, that's perfect, truth be told. Spice level 3, yeah, there's quite a bit of spice. Acidity level 3, slight bit of underrated florals, of course, in this cup. Sweetness level 3, probably a 3.5. Certain days you could probably push that maybe to a 4, but I think I'm a little bit more comfortable with it at a 3. Lighter bodied cup of coffee. The bitterness is a combination of things. It's a little bit of a bitter mint. It's a little bit of a bitter herbal component to it, as we like to note exactly what the bitterness is anytime we mark the bitterness accordingly on the tasting wheel. But for the most part, it's a complex coffee, so I did the best we could with the tasting wheel. I think it looks, for the most part, pretty okay with what we were getting. All right, our overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. So contrary to the fact that we've been like waffling back and forth on a lot of the experiences we'd had with this coffee, it was actually quite enjoyable because the sweetness from this cup was quite a fun experience, and we love when coffees are overly unique, and this coffee was definitely what you describe as overly unique. It's got such a strong mint component to it, which isn't as common in a lot of coffees. And what else those herbal components were interesting, and that stone fruit that we couldn't necessarily put our finger on exactly what it was interesting. And we still love lighter bodied clean cups of coffee, so it had both of those things going for it. And at the root of things, when you get stuff that you really like about coffee, specifically lighter bodied and cleanliness in a cup, you're probably going to enjoy the cup of coffee, even if it is something just a little bit more unique, wild, and out there. So the type of person we would suggest this coffee to is somebody that's really, really likes their citrusy finishes, as this one had that. Lighter bodied cups of coffee, lighter coffees in general, and some really nice complexity, some distinct flavors that you might not necessarily get in a lot of other cups of coffee. So the adventurous coffee drinker is the best person that we could suggest this coffee to, as we consider ourselves pretty adventurous when it comes to drinking coffee. So this one right here definitely hit the mark. It's not going to be our favorite El Paraiso coffee of the year. It's not going to be a top 10 favorite coffee of ours, but they definitely caught our eye. They definitely caught our interest, and we definitely want to try some more stuff from Leaves in the future. So we'll keep an eye out. Hopefully there's something just as interesting in the future that we can try. But I think we're going to leave this review at that. If you've by chance tried this coffee or anything from Leaves, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it, or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the El Paraiso Double Wash Anaerobic Processed Colombia from Leaves Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.